Hey guys, I'm Emily from The Blue Mouse, and today I'm going to show you how to do an Italian bind-off, but it's perfect for a stretchy bind-off to go with your brioche knitting. So I'm going to show you how to do this bind-off on a light side row. So you can cut the dark colored yarn long enough to weave in the ends, but you're going to want to cut the light colored yarn 3 to 4 times the length of your project. So how wide your project is, you're going to want to cut the length of yarn 3 or 4 times that. So you just thread your yarn needle. So you're just going to go into the first stitch, which is a knit stitch, and you're going to go into it as if to purl. Now I've pulled the first stitch a little bit tight, but when you're working the entire bind off, you want to work loosely. You can always go back and tighten it up, but if you make it too tight initially, it's just gonna stay that way. So now we're gonna go in between the first and second stitches. So you just take your needle and you go in between them and pull through. And now we're going to go into the front loop of that second stitch and go through the back. Now there is a way to do that all in one motion, but I find that it's easier to learn it in the beginning by doing it in 2 steps. So now we're going to knit off the first stitch, and what that means is that you go into that first stitch as if to knit, and then slide it off and pull the yarn through. And now we're going to go into that second stitch, which is your brioche knit, and you're going to go into it as if to purl. So remember, these 2 loops count as 1 stitch, so when you go into it as if to purl, you go into both loops. I find it's helpful after each step to kind of stretch your piece to make sure that your bind off isn't too tight. And then you're going to go into the back loop of your first stitch from right to left into the back loop. Go into it, pull through, and then you can slide that stitch off. And then we're going to go back in between the first and second stitches. So remember, these 2 loops count as just 1 stitch. So you go between them. You're not going through any loop, you're just going between those 2 stitches. Pull to the front, and then you're going to go through the front loop of this second stitch here. Go through the front loop, and you're going to go through the back here and pull through. And this is where you can start to repeat what you're doing. So you're going to go and knit off the first stitch. So you go into these 2 loops that make up that first stitch. You go into them knitwise, and you can slide off and pull your yarn through. And now you're going to go into your second stitch, which is a brioche knit stitch, and you're going to go into it purlwise. So you go into both loops purlwise and pull through. And you want to make sure that your loop doesn't get caught on your needle like mine just did. If that happens, just slide it off and fix it. And then you're going to go into the first stitch and work it off. So you go purlwise into the back loop, pull through and slide off. And then you're going to go in between the first and second stitches. And then you go into the front loop of that second stitch and go through the back. Pull the yarn through. And then you're going to knit off that first stitch, or your brioche knit stitch. So you go into it as if to knit and slide it off. Then you can pull your yarn through. And if you want to make sure that you're not doing it too tightly, just pull it apart a little bit like this. You're not undoing your work, it will just keep it loose. Now you're going to go into the second stitch purlwise. So you go into these 2 loops that make up that brioche knit purlwise and pull your yarn through. Now you're going to go into that first stitch through the back loop purlwise and slide it off as you're pulling the yarn through. So now I'm going to show you how to do this next motion in just 1 step instead of 2. So you bring your needle between those 2 stitches like you've been doing, but instead of pulling it all the way through, you're just going to grab the front loop of that stitch now. So you go, bring your needle between those 2 stitches, bring it around so that you're just grabbing that front loop of that stitch, and pull through. So it's the exact same step that you had been doing, but you do it all at once. And now this is really where you start to repeat. So you can repeat from here on to the end of your work. So you go into your first stitch, which is a brioche knit stitch, and you're going to knit it off. Go into the second stitch on your left hand needle, which is a brioche knit stitch, and you're going to go in purlwise. And then you're going to purl off the first stitch, So you go through the back loop as if to purl and slide off. And then you're going to go in between the first and second stitches on your left hand needle. And the first stitch is always a brioche knit and the second is always a normal stitch that would have been a slip-on yarn over. So you go between them, you pick up that front loop on that second stitch, pull to the back, and then you repeat. So you knit that first one off, go into the second stitch as if to purl, purl off that first stitch, so go through the back loop as if to purl, slide off, pull the yarn through. Go between the first and second loops on your left hand needle, go into that front loop of the second one to the back, and then you just repeat. So you're going to knit off that brioche knit stitch, go into that second stitch as if to purl, purl off the first stitch through the back loop, go between the first and second stitches into that front loop of the second stitch through the back, knit off that first stitch, go into that second stitch as if to purl, purl off that first stitch, go in between the first and second through the front loop of the second, pull through, knit off that first stitch. So we're coming to the last few stitches. So we're going to purl this one, purl off through the back loop this one, and then we come between the first and second through the front loop of that second to the back, pull through. Then we're going to knit off this first one. Then we come into this second stitch, which is also your last stitch. You're going to go into it purlwise. Then you're going to purl off this first stitch, so through the back loop, go through, pull off and slide your yarn through. And then you finish with a knit off, so you just go through this last stitch as if to knit, pull the yarn through, weave in your ends, and you're all good to go. And it should be nice and stretchy to match your brioche knitting.